Is it recording? Is it recording? I think it's a recording. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So hello and welcome to SCBWI Arizona Equity and Inclusion. We have a wonderful guest author today. Her name is Sara Fujimura. She is a hybrid author. She has 2 traditionally published books with Teen and 2 independent self-published books that she also produced on her own. And then she has an agent, and we are so excited that she's here today because she is married to a Japanese man and she has biracial children, and most of her books are about biracial characters. And so we're excited to talk to her today about writing characters who do not look like you. And so thank you, Sara, for being here.
Thank you for having me. So I say, hajimemashite, dozo yoshiku onegaishimasu. Fujimura Sara desu. Schaumburg, Illinois に住んでいます。これは私の本がです。Here we go. So hi, I'm Sara Fujimura. I live outside of Schaumburg, Illinois, and I have four books, and one of them has been translated into Korean. This one is actually the Japanese one. This is in English, but I made it look like, I wanted it to look like manga. So that's why it says it on the end. So today I want to talk just a little bit about my why, so you understand how I am rooted into what I write. But more importantly, I wanted to share how to write. So you'll have to do your own internal why later, and are you the correct person to write the books? But then I want to teach you how to write when you are, if not completely outside of your lane, or at least like kind of parallel to the lane, little close to the lane, but maybe not inside the lane. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is why I write about mixed Japanese families, mixed Asian families, but specifically mixed Japanese families. So as Karen said, my husband is Japanese. My husband moved to the United States by himself when he was 16 in the 80s, and he lived with an American family. He loved America so much, and he loved America so much that he decided that he did not want to go back to Japan after he finished high school. He wanted to stay in the United States, go on to college. I met him at the University of North Carolina. And then he stayed and got a job, and he worked. He still works for a Japanese company. He started off as an interpreter, even though his degree is in geography. He started working as an interpreter because he had worked on his English so much that he is truly bilingual and bicultural. And there's a difference. Is that the same thing? It's like, no, there's a difference, because you can translate, because Google Translate can translate things for you. But that idea of like having the cultural nuance around it and how to speak and how to translate within each culture and stuff is a skill that AI will never be able to do. So he stayed, he works for a Japanese company. He continues to work for a Japanese company. He moves back and forth. So we have 2 biracial kids. They've grown up in the United States, and they've been to Japan many times. We used to go to Japan every summer when they were growing up, because my kids right now are 26 and 24. But when they were growing up, we used to go to Japan every summer to stay with their grandparents out in the countryside of Japan. So that's different than Tokyo. But staying with their grandparents and being really immersed in the culture. And something that's a little bit different is our family. His side of the family is Buddhist, so they're a Buddhist family. I'm not Buddhist, and actually my husband is not Buddhist either. But that idea of like, that's a different mindset. And also because they are a temple family, that's an even different mindset. So it's like his father was like a religious leader in the Buddhist community. So we got to see him and how it affected what he did and stuff like that. So even with my Japanese friends who are Buddhist, our lifestyle is different there in Japan than theirs are. So what I want to talk about, and I'll keep bringing this up. So can you show the picture of the Phoropter real quick? So if anybody has bad eyes like I do, and you go to the eye doctor, at least they used to. I don't know if they still do that. It might now all be computerized or a hybrid. There's this thing called the Phoropter. This is a Phoropter. So if you have bad eyes, they'll do like better 1, better 2. And they'll be like, okay, better 1, better 2. And so the bigger picture of writing diverse characters is that idea of there is not one lens. Every culture, every character, every person that you meet has all these different lenses that contribute to their worldview and the way that they see out into the world. And so what you're trying to represent is, and know that you will never be completely right, and you may never be completely wrong. There may be shades of different things all the time, as it depends on what their lifestyle is. Are they an immigrant? Are they an immigrant's child? In a lot of the Japanese American community, they do like issei nisei. Issei is the people who have come, like my husband, from Japan directly, but they were born in Japan. So, and then you have they have gosei. So gosei is fifth generation. So there are people of Japanese descent, even if both of their parents are of Japanese descent, but they're Americans that they've never been to Japan. They don't speak Japanese, and maybe outside of like New Year's, very specific cultural touchstones, that their lifestyle doesn't look anything like what maybe my family's lifestyle looks back in Japan. So okay, so we can take the phoropter down, but this is how that idea of like all the lenses in your life, which your birth order. So my husband is number one son, and it's not just a Japanese thing, it's not just an Asian thing, but that idea of if you are male, if you're female, if you're non-binary, where do you fit into the traditional culture? Are you a traditional family? Are you a very more progressive family? So all these things are going to play into it. If you take nothing else from today and you want to write diverse characters, do everything with intention. So do your research, do it with care, do it with nuance. Know that the conversation is always changing. When I started so I've been part of SCBWI for 25 years now, about 25, 26 years, and I have watched the diversity change sometimes dramatically in the last 20 years, even within the last couple of years. So for example, so how long have you guys been writing? So if you've been writing for like over 1 year, please raise your hand. Okay, if you've been writing for over 5 years, raise your hand. About 10 years? About 15 years? About 20 years? Okay, good. So you guys know it too. So what I used to call so remember the little if you have like small children, they would have the little what they call.
Oh, the Russian
My kids
basketball?
had like the little play sets, the little Playmobil sets, and they had like they had the white kid with orange hair and freckles. They had the little Asian girl who had like the very stereotypical Asian haircut. They had the black boy who obviously had a fro, and they had the little blonde girl. And so that was our diversity back 25 years ago. And so I remember going to an SCBW conference when they used to have them in LA, and I was looking at people's books and stuff, and I saw families that looked like mine. And I remember specifically saying, oh, I love this family looks like my family. Or when my daughter started reading are you familiar with the Biscuit books, the little dog Biscuit? It was like very early chapter reader kind of thing. And so the little girl has a dog named Biscuit, and the little girl has a little bit of a tan. She has dark brown hair and she has brown eyes. And I remember specifically my daughter going, oh my gosh, this little girl looks like me. So we bought all the books, all the Biscuit books, all of them came home. So that idea of like people are looking for it, and they've always been looking for it. But now we swung from no diversity to a push to diversity. That was the next chapter, where like we need to see more diverse, but it was the most stereotypical, one-dimensional kind of stuff. So it's like, okay, well, we're heading in the right direction, but it's still not right. And that was the anybody can write anything kind of thing. And then we swung even further to the no, you need to stay in your lane. You can only write about the experiences that you have specifically. And that there was some good pushback, because we were moving away from like stereotypes and caricatures and the deeper nuanced conversation. But then it swung even further into, you can only write what you specifically know, and now you have to prove that you can write. So we had people who were writing queer characters, and so having to out themselves, or people who are writing about mental health, and it's like, well, your character is having a severe depression and stuff. And so the kind of trauma mining, there's terms for it, and I'm not sure what it is, but that idea of people having to make a platform about why and prove, and even within the communities, like then enough. And I saw a lot of infighting within like even specific communities of like, yes, but you can't write about this character because you don't live in this place. You're part of the diaspora. So if you don't know what diaspora is, it means like people who identify with a specific um, geographical location, but they don't necessarily live there. So, for example, Karen is Taiwanese American. She's part of the Taiwanese diaspora, even though she's American. She's American of Taiwanese descent. So that idea of like there would be a pushback of like, no, 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 you don't get to write a book set in Taiwan because you've never lived in Taiwan full time. You're not enough. So we kind of swung into the you're not enough and you have to prove who you are. And again, each thing has like its silver lining, because then it started picking apart of there is not one story. The diaspora has different stories. And again, coming back to the Phoropter, that idea of like the stories which I love of like Exo Kitty and Love Boat Taipei, and it's the American goes abroad to their family's kind of culture, but they're still the American abroad. And so getting to see it reflected back has been very, very interesting to me. And so now I feel like we're swinging back a little bit the other way of yes, you can write outside of what you're really easily checked off boxes, but you have to do it with care and you have to do it with a why. Why are you writing it? Why are you the person to write it? Should you be writing it? So if you are a teacher and you're just like, no, this is what my classroom looks like. These are the kids that I know. These, we have a very large, population of this type of people. And so I'm actively educating myself how to relate to these children and reach these children and be culturally sensitive, and they're teaching me as much as I am teaching them. So you still have that pushback of like, yes, you need to qualify why you're the person to write this story, but I do feel like that we have swung back a little bit where as long as you can do that, people will give you a little bit more leeway. The other thing that I think everybody needs to take home with them right away is like, you will be wrong. You will be wrong, and people will tell you that you're wrong. And so be okay with it. Don't argue with people on the internet. I mean, if you want to, you can do the, thank you for telling me your perspective. I really appreciate it. And then you can make content out of it too. It's like, so I get pushback sometimes about this. Here's my receipt. And so like, and here's the picture of it. But part of it is more of just the internal of I've had people point out, it's like, that's not right. That's not right. It's like, okay, well, that came pretty much verbatim for a conversation we had in my kitchen between my family and some of my kids' friends who are also biracial Asian. So that idea of like I know that it's correct, even though other people may have said no, that is not correct. So just know that you may get yourself in trouble, and you may need to qualify yourself a little bit of why you do that. I like to use the fact that people make assumptions. So if you see my last name, this happens all the time. You do not expect to see a very white woman on the screen. It's like, why? And it depends. Like sometimes I will qualify. It's like, oh, I'm married to a Japanese man. They're like, oh, okay. And then sometimes I just don't. And probably kind of screw with your brain just a little bit, make you think in a different way, because there's a bigger conversation about, and this is very specific to the Asian perspective of, up until the 70s, my husband and I would not have been legally been able to be married at all. So that idea of like, oh, okay, well, what's the bigger conversation? So if you go backwards and you see a lot of mixed Asian families before, a lot of them were white men married to Asian women. Okay, that's that's a stereotype. Okay, why? Because these are military. This is the Cinderella story. This is the saving of it, and even seeing it a little bit more of my generation. That idea of I have several friends who are married to white men who were missionaries. They're Mormon missionaries that were in Japan. So is that a Cinderella story? Were they being saved? I don't know. Like literally, spiritually, I'm not sure. But that bigger idea of like, oh, this Asian woman needs to be saved is like, no, not necessarily. As you come forward, is like maybe they met at in the same business. Maybe she was the translator, or she's comes from a very wealthy family. So there are stereotypes that we are pushing against, and that idea, because that stereotype is pushing against the idea of like, oh, you're a white woman married to an Asian man, like how does that happen? It's like it does happen. But just again, that's just a different lens. So but you can also take it backwards, where you have kids who have a very Anglo name and their face does not match their name, and so okay, are they adopted? Are they transracially adopted, transnationally adopted kind of thing? Are they biracial? I don't know. But just that idea of like, I don't mind like pushing that stereotype too of your name does not match your face. Yes, so Sarah says my Asian dad married a Caucasian woman. Hey, Sarah, where did they meet? Or if you want to give us a little things, like, did they meet for business at school? Because I met my husband at the University of North Carolina at church. Okay. Yeah. So that idea of like there's different places, and before, if you were writing a book that is set in like the 40s or something like that, it might have been, a thing of like they're in the military and she's a nurse or doctor or something like that. Oh,
Something
you're
North
yeah,
Carolina.
yeah. University of North Carolina at Greensboro, UNCG. We lived in the same international dorm, and we played in a band together. We played in a yes, in a pop band together. So that was fun. But yeah, so just like pushing against different boundaries and stuff. So do you have a question for me, Karen, you
I
want to
do.
talk about?
I think since you did such a great job introducing yourself and like your why, I'm gonna skip over some of the like where do you get your ideas and inspirations. Can you tell us like if you have resources or techniques um to use while writing diverse characters, especially characters who are not the same as you?
Yes. So I started off as a journalist. So I come at everything in my life is I'm really curious about how people do stuff, how people how they celebrate holidays, how they do everything. So I'm always like asking questions. But even when I'm writing about Japanese characters, I asked my friend. So Tanabata Wish came out first. It's about an American girl who goes to Japan for the summer with her mom and her Japanese stepdad, and it's a fish out of water story, a coming of age story, first love story. Falls in love with a boy who is half Japanese, half white, who goes to Japan every summer to stay with his grandparents, like my kids do. So those kids who have a foot in two different worlds. So this is not an autobiographical book. There are definitely autobiographical components in it, and so like all the times that Sky embarrasses herself culturally in Japan, probably me. The other one is she falls in a koi pond. That was actually my husband. He fell in his grandparents' koi pond. But that idea of like taking from your real life, and then also like my friends, I used to write on Facebook like almost like a blog kind of thing where every day I would put like this is what we did and this is what I learned, because I like to teach too. And so my friends can pick out the real parts in here, but this is a fictional account. So one of the biggest things I struggled with this one was the idea of writing characters who are Japanese but speaking in English, so that it doesn't come off offensive, but at the same time, not everybody magically speaks English well. So there is like their Japanese teacher who speaks English, the Japanese teacher's daughter who has been studying English and is very familiar with English, but she's still going to have a little bit of an accent. And then just seeing like different characters. And so in picking people from my real world so that I can hear them in my head, and the way that they phrase sentences or the emphasis that they put on words, and then knowing there are some stereotypes, but there is a truth to it. So my mother-in-law actually is a retired English teacher, so her English is very, very good. But her pronunciation, she has some very specific pronunciations. So like th, the sound of th doesn't exist in Japanese. So that idea of like that's something that a lot of people still continue to struggle with. So being able to hear my friend in my head as she has Emmy's voice, to make sure that it sounds realistic, but without being too choppy and stereotypical. And then the other thing that you can do moving forward when you're writing books. So in Faking Reality, I have a little bit of the same issue. So Faking Reality is set in Phoenix. The main character is a biracial. So she's actually three-quarters white, one-quarter Japanese. But the boy in the story is half Japanese, half white, and he works in his family's Japanese restaurant. So he is number one son and number one grandson, and his grandfather owns the restaurant. His father is Japanese also. So, but because Leo is biracial, he's American born. Like his English is different from his father's English, which is different from his grandfather's English. And so what I did was there in Japanese, L and R kind of there's a sound that it's kind of blurred together. So his name is Leo. So in the first time we meet Oji-chan, the grandfather, and he's calling Leo by name, he says it in that kind of Leo. And so Dakota is the one who's telling the story. So she makes mention it so the audience knows that when Oji-chan calls Leo by his name, it has that bending of L and R. But I don't have to do that after that. So after that, you know what it's supposed to sound like, or if you don't, it doesn't make or break the story. But it lets you know that his grandfather still has an accent, but it's not, he doesn't speak broken English, but there's pieces that sound a little bit different. So I think there's one way, instead of writing like dialects and stuff like that, where you pick one or you identify it near the beginning so that the reader knows, but that way you don't have to put like a lot of like weird kind of things that'll bump you out of the story. So I think that's really helpful. um the
I have,
power of names the power of names is really important. So in Tanabata Wish, so when David is in America, he goes by David. When he is in Japan, his family all call him Ryohei. And so there's a big turning point for him when Sky meets him for the first time. She says, "Oh, what's your name?" He says, "Well, it's David or Ryohei." And she said, "Well, what do I call you?" And he said, "Well, since you can pronounce the sound V sound, you can call me David." And they're speaking English. But near the end, as he transforms and becomes more comfortable himself, and also as Sky transforms and becomes more global, then they slowly switch to calling him Ryohei as his real name when he's in Japan. So if you have friends who have like really difficult names, whether it's a foreign name or just a difficult name, ask them what their Starbucks name is. Have you heard this phenomenon? It's like, "Oh, what's your Starbucks name?" So my husband's Starbucks name is Jason, because he doesn't want to have to spell his name and he doesn't want to hear it massacred and stuff. So he says, "It's Jason." Just want black coffee and it's Jason. So
I know
that's something that I've never
I
had to
have,
do.
I have a black coworker. His name is Keita, and but his last name is Charles. Charles is the name that he uses for ordering to go or whatever, Starbucks, whatever. It's always
Yeah.
Charles because he
Yeah.
doesn't bother spelling out.
Yeah. So, but that idea of like, it's not something I would have known if I hadn't seen my husband do it. So I asked, it's like, "Oh, do you have a Starbucks name too?" They're like, "Oh yeah, 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 I have a Starbucks name. It's Lisa." Okay.
Oh,
All
that's
right. But that idea of like when I'm in Japan, even for me, so when I'm in Japan, my maiden name is Francis. And so there is no Francis, is Furansisu, Furansisu. And so I'm okay with that. It's like, well, that's mispronounced. It's like, no, that's the phonetic spelling is Furansisu. But my name is Sara. And unfortunately, Sara means plate. But I don't, but that's not the Japanese pronunciation, is Sera. So it's Sera. So like I'm misspelling my own name.
hmm.
Okay, it's fine, but it's pronounced correctly if I Sera. So it's I don't know, but the power of name, and then the power of name that you use, and so even sometimes it's weaponized or makes people feel others like, yes, but what's your real name? What's your other name? Even within the same community. And so my kids have English, because my mom is from Scotland. They have English first names. They have Japanese middle names and Japanese last names, and so those kids they get to decide. And it's been interesting again to watch the diaspora change. And when I was working with Tortine, my second editor was American of Korean descent, and so she came with her parents from Korea when she was a very small child, and then they assimilated. So she's about my age. She might be a little bit younger. So that idea of like in the 70s and 80s, if you're coming from a different country, you need to assimilate as much as possible. You need to have an English, American first name. Don't bring stinky lunches to school. Don't bring the weird stuff. Like that idea of like peanut butter and jelly. And I even talk about even though Leo works in a Japanese restaurant and he has all kinds of wonderful foods, people have made fun of him when he was a little kid. So he eats like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in a plastic bag. So that idea of, and if I had my Japanese friends here ask me, it's like, "Well, Sarah, what do you make for your kids?" Because my kids are getting bullied at school for their stinky lunches and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, actually, I make Japanese stuff, so a lot of Japanese stuff. But um, the idea of food, and I just lost my train of thought. Oh, the idea of like Susan's relationship. So when we were writing Faking Reality, we had some conversations. The biggest conversation we had was about my little bio section, because I said, Sarah's the American half of her Japanese American family. And Susan said, "Sarah, we're all Americans here." And I'm like, "But we're not." It's like my husband has a even though he's lived here since he was 16, he's still a Japanese citizen. He has a green card. We go to Japan. We watch Japanese TV. We eat Japanese food. I mean, we go back and forth. But that idea of like, he's still Japanese. And so that takes away from if you say, oh, no, 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 he's American. It's like, well, that's not what his passport says. And I mean, he can decide that he is or not. But that idea of like, I think that's a different conversation because we weren't trying to lose everything. So, but that idea of like she's not wrong, but she's not right. So there's a lot of that. Whereas like that's right for your family, that's not right for my family, and having to kind of back yourself up. When we were working on Every Reason We Shouldn't, which came out first, I actually had a white editor, and we did have, and I wanted, and I was very happy for it, to have a panel of different people within Tor looking at it, and they were all Asian women. But even then, we didn't always get the same idea. Some people say, no, this I don't think this is correct. It's like, yes, this is correct. Oh, I know one of the biggest ones we had was my main character in Every Reason We Shouldn't is a professional skater. So she is very cognizant of the food that she has and what she puts in her body. So she had a thing where she had made some brownies with her friends. So she finally has friends. They have made some brownies, and she's like, I cannot eat these brownies. I already had one. I cannot eat more. So we're borderline a little bit on eating disorders. But the idea of like she brings the brownies home because her friends insist that she brings it home, even though she's trying to leave them behind multiple places by accident. She brings it home. She throws it in the trash, even though it has plastic around it. She throws it in the trash, and was like, no, you can't do that. Like, you cannot waste it. So that idea of like, okay, again, the lenses of the different lenses of how you're doing stuff. So she actually does pull it out of the trash. But but the idea of we had different people giving different opinions, but at the end of the day, when there was something that I was not sure about, or there wasn't consensus about, I went back to my kids and I said, you tell me, this book is for you. You tell me, is this correct or is this not correct? And whatever you say is what we're going to do. And so that's what I'm doing. Or also, one layer up from that is we had one lady who was of Japanese descent. She was probably Sansei, so third generation. But again, third generation versus my kids who are, second generation is still different. She had a lot of sway into what I changed and what I didn't change.
Oh, that kind of leads into the next question of, do you have resources or contacts for sensitivity readers? Like, yeah, it seems like you've worked with some sensitivity readers. Like, was it through your publisher or was it through people that you knew yourself?
The first layer was me and my friends, and then the second layer was through the tour, and they were basically people who worked for tour. So sometimes I know they will hire out to different people, but the women who worked on the book actually worked for tour in different editorial kind of things. Um, we did not do nearly as much in the second book because that time I had moved over to Susan, who again is Asian. So she's like, we don't need to have six other people do it. But so we just used her. And also I felt a little bit more comfortable at that point of and always learning. So I'm always learning. It's like, okay, this might be problematic, or let me do a temperature check on this. But it still comes back to me pulling on my real world. And I think that's for you too. So everybody's like, at the end of the day, yes, I appreciate like other people being sensitivity readers, but I want the people who are in my life because I'm writing for them. I'm writing for their kids. It's like, and when I have in Faking Reality, there's a love triangle. And so the second boy is biracial. He is half Mexican, half white. And so I have a family I'm very close to who mom is Mexican American, and dad is white. And so I gave it to her and her college age daughter. And even between the two of them, they didn't always agree on what was correct and what was not correct. But because we have such a close relationship, I could say it's like if you're reading and you get any kind of twinge, anything that bumps you out of the story, if something you get like a little kind of a little ping or anything at all, tell me, because I want to know, because I want to know it from you, and so we can have a bigger conversation of like something's not sitting right with me and I don't know why. It's like, well, let's have a bigger conversation about it, because I would rather hear it from you and be able to fix it than get a 1-star review about it. So let's have the conversation where you can educate me, and because we're close friends, that we can have a deeper conversation about things.
So what if you have characters in your story who you don't normally interact with? What would you suggest?
Okay, so again, we're talking about like how things have changed. So what I'm hearing right now, and I was the moderator for a diversity panel. It was for adults, but on a diversity panel at Romance Con in Milwaukee, and I was interviewing 4 romance writers who are all people of color, and also intersectionality. So one was a Muslim lady who was Pakistani. We had a man who was Arab American and he was queer. And so that idea of that's what we were talking about, the intersectionality even within their own communities and stuff too, which is fascinating. I really enjoyed, and I hope we'll get to do more of that. But that idea of if you don't know of that, they said that if you're writing about the person's joy, if they're like a community's joy, they said, okay, that's better. If you're going to like, okay, now I am going to give you my interpretation of the civil rights movement. It's like, that is not for you, Sarah. It's like, that is not your lived experience. That's not the story for you. And so I think that's a question for a lot of people. And sometimes it's hard. Are you the correct person to write this story? It's like, I have a great idea for this type of story. It's like, does your real world look like that? No. Can I do research? Yes, I was a journalist first. But it's like, okay, I'm sure I could if I really wanted to, and I would find the people to help me and stuff like that. But it's like, this is really not my story. So I need to like back away. If like again, if you are a teacher or something like that, then you can say these are my students and I'm trying to learn to better my students. Um, if if you're writing just to add diversity, just because like, oh, if things that don't have diversity don't sell, what I'm hearing, and I don't know if this is 100% true, is it's better just not to do it. Not either not to do it at all or make it like the tertiary characters or the secondary characters. For example, like you can put it in like, oh, the main character has to go to the dentist. Oh, and her dentist is Pakistani descent and wears hijab. So I guess my my dentist is a Pakistani of and wears hijab. So they're coming in, they're fixing my teeth, and if it's not a story about going to the dentist, then it's like the barista or the teacher or other places that you could do that. But just making sure that it's not a caricature. So yes, there are Indian people who own convenience stores, but like doing Apu from The Simpsons, like no, please don't do that. Uh, but there are things that are true. So I don't know. It's I think what they're saying right now is like if you aren't of that or you cannot be like really close to it, then don't make that person the main character. Maybe make it a side character, or just people in the classroom or something like that. That's better than trying to pretend like you know all the things about something that you don't. Oh, the other thing they said was there was like a really popular character in this one woman's series, and she said, I can't write this person. The woman was Vietnamese, and the main character was black. The other character was black. She's like, I'm not a black woman. I don't feel like I could write her. I don't feel like I could write her story from her point of view, but she can be the side character that we see all the time. So maybe that's for you too. That idea of like just being the secondary character that you can do, but I'm not getting inside of her head and talking first person out of it.
Okay, I'm going to continue the question. You're doing so well. Thanks for your answers. Have you identified any blind spots in how you portray an experience different from your own? Or how have you adjusted your thinking and writing to overcome these blind spots?
Hmm. Yeah, because I'm a journalist first, I always come into it if like I don't know anything. And so I always want to know and I always want to ask questions. And I'm lucky because again, my mother-in-law is a retired English teacher that I'm always asking her the why behind things. So why this food, why this color, why this idea? And so she can answer my questions versus doing research. But I know if I hadn't gone to Japan and everything that I know about Japan comes from like anime or movies or something like that, that there are truths in it, but it's not the full truth. And so having they call it the if you know, you know, but there is a power in that knowledge of like, oh yeah, yeah, I know what. And so when you come to my table when I'm doing signings and stuff, I'll have things that kind of signal to people like, I know what that is. I was like, I don't remember what the name is. Hold on just 1 second. I have this little guy. He's a Daruma. but that idea, like if you've been to Japan, if you've been watching, different things, you know what this is, even if you're not 100% sure. It's like, okay, but I know it, I see it, and I know it, just like you can see Pikachu behind me. But those things of like signaling to to the people that you're trying to find, and so we can have a conversation like, do you know what this is? And like, oh, you do, how do you know? Oh, I've been to Japan. Oh, what were you doing in Japan? Oh, I was a student. Oh, I taught English. Oh, I was in the military. Or I stayed with a host family. So the adding to the global conversation, and I think that's where we're headed next. Because the one good thing that came out of the pandemic in media was that we've all expanded our horizons, because you watched everything that you would normally watch, and then you still had time to kill. So you're like, you know what? I love mystery, so I'm gonna watch Lupin, in
Oh,
the original Lupin. Okay. Oh, now I'm going to watch the new version of Lupin that stars an African Frenchman, and his version of it. And then there's a Japanese version where it's like the family of Lupin kind of idea. So that idea of like, you find a thing and then you watch it across the board in different ways. Or Korean dramas, the amount of people that started watching anime, and they're like, oh, that's cartoons for kids. Like, well, this is really, and they sat down with their kids and they're like, do we have time to watch another episode? So the idea of like, we've gotten over reading subtitles, because before, like, no, we're not reading subtitles. Like, no, I want to read the subtitles. I want to hear the language that it was done. I may have to watch it a second time because I'm just too busy reading the subtitles. But that idea that we are consuming media from around the world, and so that's what I'm hoping. That's what I've been doing for a while, and that's what I'm hoping will become the next big thing, where it is everybody's a little bit more educated. And I guess the biggest example I can think of is I have been the Obento lady. So everybody has like different connections, and my connection to Japan is food. I'm a foodie. I love food. And so bento, like the Japanese lunchbox concept, when I started in the anime community 15 years ago, I was bringing boxes back from Japan. So they had like Hello Kitty on them, or Totoro, or different types of boxes and stuff. And I still do. But I had to teach American teenagers and 20 somethings, stop eating Lunchables, stop putting your sad peanut butter sandwich in a plastic bag, which is why Leo puts his sandwich in a sad plastic bag. Make bento, it's good for the environment, it's good for your body, and you can be artistic and stuff like that. So that was 15 years ago. Fast forward to about 6 months ago, I went to a library to teach how to make bento, which I've done many, many times, to Generation Alpha. So alphas they're coming into, I think they're 14 and under, or 13 and under. So they're new kids. Okay, you can buy bento, the boxes and stuff and everything, at Target, at Walmart. They're not as cute as mine, because mine are cute and I bring them from Japan. But that idea of like, the idea of meal prepping and stuff is not new. And so I started off with my whole spiel that I've been doing for years, like, this is why you should use boxes instead of plastic. And they're like, we always use boxes. This is why you should stop drinking like the Capri Suns. It's like, and they're walking around with their Stanley cups. And so that idea of like, the whole mindset has changed. And that's more of a global thing. So before I was trying to explain, so now mine is more about like, these are the Japanese rules. So if you want to make a traditional one, these are the colors that you use, these are blah, blah, blah. So, but anyway, that bigger idea of the whole conversation, even though it came out of Japan, is changed around the world. And so just as we consume stuff from around the world, I think is very interesting, and just the way that we do things.
okay, I'm going to open it up to anybody else who has questions. I wanted to go until like 2:50, and then we have some housekeeping stuff that we need to do for E and I. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah, Sally.
Trying to get off mute. Hi, how are you? Thanks for your presentation. I'm curious about then what you've just been talking about, the point of view. So you're not just writing though from a white girl point of view for the main character. Some of your main characters
sometimes I am and sometimes I'm not. Yeah.
Okay, so that just, because I was thinking that you were saying one thing and then I'm going, well, no, I think she must not really do that. So just curious as to if you have a main character that's biracial.
So I understand what you're asking though. So the idea of, and I try to make all my characters a little bit different. So both Olivia is, who is in Every Reason We Shouldn't, is biracial, Japanese and white. Her mom is Japanese, her dad is white, but her mom is like third or fourth generation Japanese American. And so she has a very, like my editor has a very white perspective on life. So it wasn't as difficult. I mean, they talk about like, oh, we're gonna go out for food at our favorite Japanese restaurant, and how her mom doesn't speak Japanese very well. She has her phrases, and she was, even Olivia is studying Japanese in high school, and she says, you know, I try to talk to my grandparents, but we get frustrated. So the idea of those kids who are very removed from the diaspora. So I think that I can do okay. And then with Faking Reality, she's 3/4 white, 1/4 Japanese. So her mom is of Japanese descent, but even there's that pushing away. So would I ever write a character who is, let's say, Pakistani? First person? No. I don't have enough people, and I wouldn't know how to write, oh, I am the immigrant daughter, or I'm a second or third generation Pakistani daughter. I don't know how. The Japanese ones I can do a little bit biracial, just because I see with my kids and the kids that look like mine, I feel like I can do a little bit more comfortable. Um, and I feel like I can do a little bit of the immigrant. I don't have a book of that, but of an immigrant daughter, just because I know what it is a little bit, and then also reverse. So when I'm in Japan, by myself, just some of the cultural kind of things. And then for Sky, because it's her stepdad who's Japanese, she's 100% white, and she's taking it from the complete outsider's point of view.
And then the question that was already asked was one that I had, but I just wanted to probe a little bit more on that, and that is about sensitivity readers. Is that generally done at the very end after you have your manuscript all done? Because there's a part of me that wants some of this stuff as an ongoing dialogue and as a
Oh no, I agree. I agree all the way through. So like you do your work before it even goes to an agent. And if they say, oh no, we want somebody else. But so knowing that you'll probably have one once it gets to the publishing stage, but that idea of like, don't you want to know ahead of time? It's like you can take care of the 101 stuff.
I think what she's asking is, does she need a full manuscript to have a sensitivity reader look at it?
Right.
No, I would finish the manuscript first, because that way, if you have the same problem throughout, or even if but if you have the opportunity to like, hey, here's the first 5 chapters, and like straight out the gate, are you doing something? But I think it might be because you will pay out of your pocket for sensitivity readers, or if like they're your close friends, I'm like, can I at least take you out for dinner? Can I do something so your time? And also, my friends, I have very long dedication in the back, because I'm like, thank you for talking to me and what have you. So but I can ask of that because of our friendship and stuff. So it's like I took your daughter camping, so like you owe me.
Yeah, you owe me big time. Yeah. So is there a basic range that sensitivity readers charge, or you would just have to learn that later? I'm just trying to guess, is it going to be $50, $100, $500 an hour?
Okay, so I can answer this.
Okay.
I think sensitivity readers, dependent on how experienced they are, can cost more.
Okay.
Beginner one, I was asked to do a sensitivity read for another writer, and she paid me $200.
Okay. Okay.
And I was
even if we just start
with
the like
$200,
how much would you charge
per hour?
Yeah.
Was that per hour for the whole?
Yeah, but I was also new, and it was the first time I'd done it. And if you have more experienced sensitivity readers, it'll be more expensive.
Thank you.
But I think you could start with a lower rung, especially if it's coming out of your pocket, and especially if you come with, hey, I want to pay you, how much do you charge? Versus like, I'm not asking you to do the heavy lifting, and your time is not valuable, kind of thing. So and they may say it's $1,000. You're like, okay, that's out of my budget, and that's fine, but you're still helping that idea of like, no, I appreciate you, and I'm sure you're worth $1,000. I don't have that in my budget, but I'll keep you in mind for when it sells, and if the editor's interested, kind of thing. So
okay, thank you.
Andy has something, but
Yeah, so I asked a friend of mine that used to work for Random House for several years, and she was saying that if you are self-publishing, you probably should try and find someone. But she said if you are going for traditional publishing, the publisher will typically tell you if they feel you need one, and they will handle that. Like, so if you're going for traditional publishing, she did say like definitely do your research, like read up on the internet about like writing diverse characters and stuff like that. But she said you shouldn't traditionally have to pay out of pocket for that before finding an agent. Like they'll usually, like if that's like a minor quibble or something, they'll usually let you know that, hey, we'll want to do this as a step or something. But she said it was something that Random House always paid for. Like they covered that cost.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, if you're going the traditional publishing route,
maybe it's not quite necessary. I think that
Maybe Go ahead.
if you have critique partners or somebody who you trust who is not,
yeah,
who is similar to the race of the character or the diversity of the character, you can have them take a quick look. And if they point out several different problems, then maybe it would be a good investment to do a sensitivity reader. But Mandy's totally right. Like the publishers will pay for that.
Yeah.
But you have
No,
to
I agree.
you have to
I
get
agree
the
that maybe
agent to like your book enough to represent it to the publisher. So there is.
so I agree that idea, like you doing your homework ahead of time, but maybe not getting the $1,000 reader for that, but just the idea of like, hey, can you look at this one scene, or can I talk to you about how your family celebrates New Year's? So in Faking Reality, I wanted to explore that idea of like not all families celebrate Christmas, and so because Leo's family is Buddhist, I was going to do a Christmas scene. I'm like, no, let's shake it up a little bit. So I did a New Year's scene instead, and how they celebrate it and the different things and the different cultures. But that conversation of how Dakota always celebrated Christmas, and then but she felt bad that she's like, oh, and Leo must be bad. He must be bad. And she even had like a whole thing like, and I wrote Santa's like, P.S. Can you please bring Leo a present? He really is a good boy. And so the idea of like those kids that just so they can be seen, because I do have they're actually Baha'i, and so we got to learn about Ayamiha and how their gift giving season and what they called the Santa game, and so talking to their kid about the Santa game, and so I totally pulled that, even though they're Baha'i and Leo's family is Buddhist, but being able to pull those types of things, it's not a make it or break it scene in the story, but it's just something that adds a layer of nuance to it. And so if you could do that kind of thing where you're adding a layer of nuance, so if you've been to Diwali or like something like that with your Indian friend's family, that you can add, even if it's like, hey, I'm going over to my friend's house and they're of Indian descent, and oh, the mom is like busy doing something. It's like, oh, it smells so good in here. What are you guys doing? Or oh, you have some new decorations out. Even if it's like, I just went to my friend's house to study for this big test and whatever. But those kind of like layers and like just little things that add nuance. But coming back really quick to the sensitivity readers, that you should have your own sensitivity readers, but maybe those are your close friends, or the ones that you can say, hey, can you just look at this scene and tell me if this is correct? And you're also always doing your own research about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And so that way, when it comes to having the sensitivity readers, you're doing like the really fine tuning versus like, okay, you wrote this book about your Japanese character and grandma has bound feet. What? No, the Japanese women have never had bound feet. So, but then I get like, I've seen it. I have totally seen it. Like, oh, and she came in, or little things like, all your Japanese women have kimono on. It's like, have you ever worn a kimono? Kimono are not easy to get on. Like they have kimono dressers. So unless like you live in Kyoto and your grandma owns a tea shop where like she wears a kimono like every day, okay, your mom's not going to wander through the kitchen wearing a kimono. It would be very weird. That said, if it's in the summer and they're wearing yukata, then I'm like, oh, you're going to a festival. I know what you're. So those kind of like nuanced things where it'll show you like if you know or you don't know what you're talking about.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording. Thank you, Sarah. Please stay on, okay? Everybody stay on.